Hey, everybody. Today we have for you podcast number 109. Today's podcast is titled, How Do You Want to Be Known? Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. We are Dr. Pete and Sandy Lombardi, and this is the Limitless Life Network podcast where we flesh out the limitations that are preventing you from reaching your goals and living the life that you are called to lead. And we always start off the podcast with
gratitude and thanks. So we appreciate those of you who have come up to us this week. I know Pete said someone stopped him and let him know this week that he'd been listening and who told them about the podcast. So we do appreciate that. It does encourage us. So
for sure. Because every week we always have to figure out what we're going to do the podcast on. And we always, I don't know, it's kind of like we wake up in the morning and there's some indecision as to which way we're going to go with the podcast. And so it's always good to know that people are expecting a podcast each and every week. And it's great to have that level of accountability. And it's also great because I have a feeling that this is having a positive impact in your life. And that's why you are choosing to spend some time with us. So we appreciate that and the opportunity to try our best to provide you with something that is inspiring and get you closer to God. Yeah. So here we go. On with the show, as we like to say.
Let's get at it.
All right. So today's title, How Do You Want to Be Known? Sandy, what's the backstory here? Because you, a lot of today's podcast, I got to give my wife credit because this is a lot of her.
I had a lot going on in my mind this week. So we had a guest speaker at church, and actually a member of the church who was asked to speak in our pastor's absence. And he said the moment he was asked, he said, I already know what I'm going to talk about because I had declared it years ago. If anyone ever asked me to preach, I'm going to share my testimony. So that's what he did. But he kind of kept saying in the beginning of his message was, what's your favorite story to tell? So that got me thinking. And also I've been reading this book by Michael Ivanoff, The Mount of Olives, and watched one of his speaking engagements. He does a lot of public speaking around the world. And he was a great storyteller. And he was telling various stories. And one of them kind of stuck with me about this German general who was stuck in a... what would you call it?
A bad situation.
Yeah, bad situation with his men, and it was dire, and they were surrounded. And, he said to his men, they've got us surrounded again, boys, those poor, and I can't even say the word, but he said, those poor guys. And he needed to change his men's mindset. So he flipped it and said, these guys that have us surrounded, they're the ones in trouble.
Right.
But so just the importance of a story and our ability to change someone's or a group's mindset by the story we're telling.
That's really good. It's really good. So it makes me realize, in a tactical situation like that where you are surrounded, it's actually not a good thing to do from a military standpoint. I know that you always want to give your enemy an escape route. Because when you don't, they fight harder because they know they have nothing to lose. So it's interesting that he reminded his own troops being surrounded, wow, that puts them at a disadvantage, puts us at an advantage. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that actually brings us to point number 1.
I didn't even think of it that way. That's true. So we titled number 1, A Tactical Pause. And in this story, so it's a story in John. We're reading the book of John in our life group, and it's a circle because Jesus brought it's a story of the adulterous woman. So the religious leaders are surrounding this woman they've caught in adultery, and they're ready to stone her. They've got her circled. And then Jesus steps in. And then, do you want to take over?
Yeah, and he starts to just like draw in the sand. And he's not really saying anything. And he's just drawing in the sand while they're bringing these charges against this woman. And he basically says to them, well, whoever is blameless of any sin here can cast the first stone. And they all slowly dropped their stones and walked away. And my question to Jesus someday will be, what did you write in the sand?
Yeah.
But the example here is that sometimes it's best to just hear things out and wait a minute before you react, and to just like gather your thoughts and bring them to a good place. In other words, give up some of your emotional desires to react, and let's like take a step back, and what is it going to hurt if we wait just a little bit longer, and to just think a little bit deeper, and maybe, at that point, like ask God, what's the best way? And I believe the Holy Spirit gives you the words to say.
Or not to say.
Or not to say. And sometimes that's the best thing to do, is to maybe not say anything. And that was one thing that you mentioned that, Pastor talked about, was that when you're in a situation where, it seems like you really need to say something right away, and it's making you uncomfortable, maybe to sit on it.
His
right?
daughter had shared that with me. Like, they often thought their dad wasn't like being aggressive, I guess might be a word, but enough in situations. And then they've learned over the years, his wisdom is to sit on it sometimes and just see what more information is revealed, or maybe there's in time it resolves itself. And the best thing was to not say anything. So a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah, there is. I like that a lot, because
And that's something that I know personally I've needed to really implement in my life over the years, is to not just speak immediately off of an emotional response to something, and to sit on it.
Yeah. I think that's very, very wise advice. So we call that a tactical pause. My neighbor actually used to be on the SWAT team. He's the one that gave that to me, because I was upset about something at one point, and I was ready to like sell everything and move to Alaska. And he's like, whoa, hold the phone here. You need a tactical pause.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I guess that's what they do when they get in situations on the SWAT team, is that they actually take a moment to really assess the situation before they actually do something. And they will actually drag it out a little bit longer, because it starts to resolve itself if you do. The longer you can keep things from coming to a head, oftentimes they will fizzle out and resolve themselves. So
It's great.
yeah. So that brings us to point number 2. And this one is, you don't know me. Yeah.
And this again was in John chapter 8 that we were reading this week. And again, it's the Sadducees questioning Jesus. That was a lot of the story John was telling. And in this situation, he says to them very boldly, you don't know me, and you don't know where I came from. You don't know the one who sent me. You don't know where I'm going. And I just thought, like, how powerful that response would be for all of us. Like, I think of my teen or young adult children. If someone's questioning like something they're passionate about or something they're doing, rather than let it like stick and like own this unbelief or this doubt in who you are, like, what if you could respond, you don't know me. You don't know where I've come from. You don't know who created me. You don't know where I'm going. Like, what an amazing response that would be for all of us in life. So
yeah. Who are you to do a podcast? Who are you to speak about this stuff? Well, why not? Right? Like, why not? It made me think of the story of a bunch of crabs in a bucket, and how, a crab will try to climb out of a bucket, but the other crabs in the bucket will actually reach up and grab that crab and pull it back down. And you'll never rise to the top by pulling someone else down. And a crab could, but they just won't do it. They could help that other crab that's on its way out get out, and at least one would survive. And maybe they'd even turn, if they were smart enough, they might even turn around when they get to the top and help the other ones out. but it never works that way in crab life. But we don't
We're
have
not
to
crabs.
we don't have to be crabby. We can actually help elevate others, because if we elevate others, you know what? Somebody may elevate you, but it's not about you. That's the best part, is that it doesn't have to be about you. You can actually just help to elevate others, and what happens to you. And that's okay too. Right? So that brings us to point number 3, which is clear as crystal.
This was from this morning. I'm reading Revelation. It's the end of my reading the Bible in the year. And to be honest, I was a little bit dreading this book. We've done a study of it before, thankfully. So when I got to it, I had some notes there from a amazing man, Roy, who is a great teacher in one of our groups a few years back. And so the little notes I had provided a lot of, revelation for me and some comfort and calm. And one of them was the angel. So this is written by John, and there's revelation by Jesus showing him things. And it said, the angel showed me the river of the water of life, clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God. And so the source of that living water is the throne. But in the notes, it was talking about like glass, when at the time when the Old Testament was written, was very rare. And to find glass, and let alone for it to be clear, would be extremely difficult. So it's speaking to the like amazing qualities, the untouchable qualities of God and his vastness, I guess. So, but it kind of struck me, like I had written in my notes from our teaching with Roy, like this crystal clear represented a calmness on this water. So I think of that, like if we can, in our lives, if we feel like anxious and just things are in turmoil, or we look at the world and we think, oh my goodness, what's going on? If we sit at the throne and we let that living water fill us, then there will be this calm. It's an unexplainable calm. You can't even understand how you feel that way, but it's that water that flows through you or to you that can provide that crystal clear calm.
Yeah, that living water. Yeah, that, you explained that very well. So I don't have a lot to add to that, other than, I think that that calmness is something that our culture is yearning for. This world is not a calm place, and it's actually a place where chaos and division is being really, really pushed subtly and not so subtly. And in the face of that, can you remain calm? Can you have a tactical pause? Can you have a confidence and a clarity, that is unworldly, that is supernatural? And I believe you can, and it's not going to be because of you. It's going to be because of what is in you.
Right.
So yeah, that's great. So the next one is turning mountains into smoke.
So this morning, I called our son Timothy, and he was driving into his schooling. He's going to barber school in Rochester, so he has about a half-hour commute every morning. And so I decided to call this morning and catch up. And he shared that he had the opportunity to play in a worship time on Saturday evening with his girlfriend and her parents at their church. And so he sent me the link to it. And I listened to all of it. And then there at almost the end, he said, there's a time where I got to share a song that I wrote. So I was excited to hear that. And so we played it, and I just sat and sobbed. And the word that came to me is faithful. Like, God is so faithful. And I just want to encourage any of you listening that either it's a child or a situation where you see this mountain and it just seems overwhelming. Like our Tim has a story. We all have a story. Tim wasn't like your average child, pretty much right from the get-go. And they couldn't decide what to do with him in pre-K, so they held him back there a year, and he just couldn't fit the typical mold. Tim learns differently, and over time we discovered that Tim is an amazing musician, and he's so creative, but it was a journey, and it's still a journey. But like, I remember his teen years, like I was homeschooling him and how down he would get and just couldn't seem to fit in anywhere and find his people. And then he found his people at this Bible college, and he found his calling in ministry and worship. And so listening to this song he wrote based on Psalm 104, I believe it was, and verse 31 to 35, if you want to look it up. But it talked about that Jesus can just touch the mountain, and it turned to smoke. That was one of the verses, and that he wrote a lyric about. And I just thought of that, like we have these mountains that we make up in our mind or that are put in front of us, but the Lord can just touch that and it be just disintegrated. And I think of all these mountains that Tim faced and we faced with him, and the Lord is just blown those away. And it was just beautiful. Maybe I'll somehow put a link so you guys can watch that song, but just beautiful like that. Through trials and in some of the scripture, the verses that he's saying were, no matter the weather, under whatever pressure, I will sing to the Lord. As long as I live, as long as I am, I will sing to the Lord. And it's just beautiful. Like it, to me, a summary of how you can overcome those mountains that you face.
Yeah. When I just got a vision of like the mountains and smoke, and I thought of driving up north, and I was coming out of Utica, and there was just tons and tons of cloud cover one early morning, and it's just amazing how when that all evaporates, then there's just this beautiful color from the autumn. Just the fall leaves were just beautiful, but it was all covered in cloud cover, and it almost looked like smoke in the mountains, and that's what it kind of made me think of is that, once the smoke clears, there's so much more there for you. And that, that's something that you don't necessarily see because we see the mountains so often, but we don't have to. So that was great. That brings us to
point number 5, which is future pace.
Yeah. So this is actually something that I talked about a lot yesterday in our practice, but it's something that somebody taught me years ago. And it's really speaking to people in the future that you see for them. In other words, what is possible for them? But speaking as if it is true, like it's an expectation that we already have in the present of the future. And when you do that, it just fills your subconscious with, wow, this is possible. This is going to happen. Like when you just see it already happen, it's just, we are so often reminded of who we are currently, or maybe who we were in the past, but what is your future? And that's really what God sees for you. And it's way beyond your imagination. But if you don't start to think about what you're capable in the future, but again, I think of rising tides raises all ships, or lifts all ships. That's this thing. You can speak into somebody else's life. You can future pace other people to elevate them. And I'll tell you what, that will elevate you in the process too. And when you think about like telling your testimony, telling your story and how it can elevate other people and speak into their life for what is possible, people aren't going to forget that. And that's what you will be known for. And it's just an amazing thing because like this gentleman that spoke at our church, I've seen him there for years. He's very unassuming. He's not super boisterous. If you didn't know it, you would say he's a professional speaker.
Yeah.
I mean, he was fantastic as far as his delivery, his attention. Like you just did not want to take your eyes off of him.
Yeah.
And I hung on every word he was going to say. And that is a sign of a really great message or messenger. So same thing is like future pacing is really speaking into what is possible, who you are in Christ, in your future. It can be so much bigger than your past, so much bigger than your present. And that's what we are hoping that this does is it removes those limitations. Like hearing this word today, hearing these messages that Sandy had so much of this on her heart today to share with you. It's about really just trying to get out of your own way and really allow God to work in you and through you, because you can elevate other people. That's the only reason we're here doing a podcast, is because that's what's happened to us. And we're just trying to share that love and that grace and then the power of all of that. So, yeah, you want to add anything to that?
Great. Nothing to add.
All right, I guess we're wrapping it up. That is a wrap for this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. Be sure to tune in each and every week to stay connected, be inspired, and keep moving toward your best life by stripping away your limitations. We'll see you next week.
Yep. Remember whose you are and where you're headed.